Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, another week of the Kraken not having a head coach. We're definitely going to be talking about that.
You know what? We tried our best to wait this out. We really did. It is, it's Thursday now as we record this. We did not want the deep dive curse to happen to us, but we couldn't wait any longer this week. So thank you all for your patience. Appreciate it. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, no, and look, there's still plenty to talk about, but yeah, this coaching search and the just everything around it just keeps going. I mean, I don't even know that we're gonna get deep dive cursed like at this, just because we're at the end of the week. Like, are they gonna announce it on a Saturday? Like, probably not.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I'm actually not that worried about it right now. I feel like next week's deep dive will just have
Well, you
okay,
just
never mind. All right,
fate in a big bad way, man.
It's just what I do, Dylan. Everybody knows this at this point.
That's true. That is true. So we'll, of course, be talking about the coaching search, talking about the names that are involved and where it seems like the Kraken are at with that. We're going to be talking about the season ticket holder Q&A, which feels like a week ago now, RJ, because it kind of was with new general manager Jason Botterill. Excited to talk about that. Talk about how the Kraken players performed over at Worlds. The latest Kraken signing, because we did get one of those this week, so that's fun. Can't wait to talk about that. But of course, first we have to talk about our wonderful sponsor, the law offices of Rico Tessendor. I mean, nobody, RJ, has been hurt more in all of this than Rico, who has to wait an extra 4 days for us to talk about him on the pod.
I know it's rough, and I mean, don't give Rico any ideas here as far as being hurt by us, Dylan. Let's be very careful here. But like he can help the listeners here. Maybe not go after us.
Yeah. No, I mean, I was gonna say, it does feel personal at this point, the no coaching news, because so many people keep asking us and where everything is at, and we just don't know, and there's just nothing there. But yeah, it has been a long journey, that is for sure. But thankfully, we have a wonderful partner such as Rico Tessendor to be on this journey with us. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say that at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. All right, RJ, John Hayden is coming back. 2 more years.
Yes, so we did get some news from the Kraken. It was not a coaching announcement, but it was some very good news, I think, out of Seattle yesterday. And it's that John Hayden has signed a 2-year contract extension with a $775,000 cap hit, which is the league minimum salary in the NHL. And notably, it is a one-way deal as well. So we'll kind of talk about what that means. But really, I think this is a good deal for both sides. The Kraken lock up John Hayden, somebody who very popular among the players, fans, both in Coachella Valley and in Seattle. He's been up and down between those two teams, but he's a great presence in the locker room. And Dylan, I was on social media plenty yesterday, and this is one of the few moves the Kraken make where I feel like I'm not exaggerating here. The fan reaction was 100% positive from what I saw anyway.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody within the Kraken community at large that doesn't like John Hayden, right? That doesn't appreciate what he brings to the team, whether he's playing or not, right? Just the presence he has in the locker room and the presence he has out there for practices, morning skates, and all of that kind of stuff. The presence off the ice that we've heard about in Coachella Valley too. I remember being down in Coachella Valley and one of the security guards telling me how John Hayden is like the babysitter for the team. Him and his partner, they just watch everybody's kids, and that's the kind of how they run. And they just, everybody down there speaks so highly of him. Everybody around the Kraken organization speaks so highly of him. And then of course what he brings on the ice, RJ, where he can bring some grit when the Kraken need it. And this is a lineup that at times does need somebody in there to kind of fill that role for them, but also just being able to be a net front player who does have some skill there that he can ply. And and just bring that kind of added dimension of, being a hard forechecker, somebody who can go out there and help create space for guys lower down in the lineup. He really just adds a lot both on and off the ice, and I think that's why everybody is just so happy to have him for 2 more years.
Yeah, good for the Kraken organization. I mean, you lock him up at league minimum, and then good for John Hayden as well, because he does get the security of that one-way contract, which
Mhm.
means that he is making the same salary whether he's up at the NHL level or down in the AHL. He gets that 775,000 no matter what, and a 2-year term, which you don't usually see for guys who are kind of NHL, AHL tweeners or fourth liners or something like that. But the Kraken are in a position where they can do that because strong ownership who's not afraid to spend money, because like you don't see contracts like this a whole lot, because usually ownership groups, it's a lot of real dollars that they're committing to a player who's a fourth liner, where normally you don't have to do that sort of thing. What you'll normally do is sign a two-way contract where the player, makes their NHL salary up at the NHL level, but at the AHL level would make, say, 200 to 300,000, which is, good deal less. And so it's less real dollars coming out of your pocket. But Kraken ownership, they've already showed they will spare no expense on stuff like this. And so it's perfect from a cap perspective because you cannot pay him any less as far as a cap hit. But he does get a lot more real money in his pocket at the end of the day. And that's just something that ownership's willing to do.
Yeah, and again, couldn't have happened to a better guy, and somebody that Kraken fans really enjoy. I know. I was just trying to look up real quick, just kind of like some of his underlying numbers, because I realized that that's not something that I've looked at too often with him, but I do feel like I remember thinking about them being pretty good. And yeah, obviously limited sample size of only 20 games last year with the Seattle Kraken, RJ, but expected goals for percentage of 56.75%. That's high on this team. That's very high on this team. So I mean that places him in the company basically of like Yanni Gordon, Mikey Asimont. It's as possession drivers at the top of the forward group for the Kraken last year. Like I said, he is a guy who doesn't necessarily do the flashy stuff, but he absolutely knows how to get things done.
Definitely. The numbers are always good, even in a small sample size. Feels weird that he's only played 29 games for the Kraken. It just feels like he's been around here more than that, right? But just a good player to have around that does, tilt the ice, or, can fight if you need him to as well. He can be that protector that the Kraken really didn't have for much of last season.
Yeah, great on the high danger chances percentage as well too. Tipping
Yeah.
the scales in favor of the Kraken.
Well, I remember a couple of years ago too, he briefly led the NHL in shooting percentage for a while because he had 2 goals in his first like 3 games or whatever. He only played 7 games that season, but he scored 2 goals, and was briefly ahead of everybody else as far as shooting percentage. Or no, or was it points, or was it goals per 60? It was
It might
something
be
like that.
goals per 60, I
Goals
think.
per
Yeah.
60. That's what it was.
Yeah, no. But yeah, no, it just goes to show, right? Like he's a kind of guy that does a lot out there. And again, it might not be the stuff that really stands out when you're watching the game, but he's making his presence felt, and he's making a difference in a good way for the Seattle Kraken. Talking about guys that make a difference, RJ, and in good ways. Let's talk about some of the Kraken performers over at Worlds. World Championship, the IHF World Championship just finished up, RJ. Team USA wins gold for the first time in nearly a century. That was something that I know caught a lot of people by surprise, was just how long it had been since Team USA had not only won gold, but even just been in a gold medal game. You were talking about, basically the lifespan of my grandparents.
Yeah, it did seem odd to me, but I mean, you did point out that really there was a big year of Soviet dominance kind of through the 60s to the 80s. And we talked about it on the live game commentary last night, which, by the way, thank you to all the patrons
Yeah.
who joined us for that one. We had a fun time watching the Panthers advance to the Stanley Cup final. But yeah, it did make a little more sense in that context.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's different things like that. There's also, when NHL players kind of started treating the tournament more seriously, so the North American teams started to have more success, or certainly Team USA would start to have more success on that stage. Like there is a lot that kind of goes into it. So it's, if you're somebody who's kind of followed it for a while, like it might not have been as surprising, but certainly for a lot of Kraken fans that wanted to watch players players like Matty Beniers, Mikey A. Smott, and Joey Decord, who are part of that Team USA gold medal winning team, it sure caught some people by surprise there. And those are the ones that I want to focus on here first. We can talk about kind of how everybody performed at Worlds, RJ, but looking at this Team USA team, one of the names really stands out as being just a huge part of it, and that is Matty Beniers, who ends up leading the forward group on Team USA in ice time for the tournament and game by game. Was just a huge factor in this USA squad being able to take home the gold medal. And I think that that's really important for Kraken fans to see and to appreciate, because we know that it's been at times rocky for Matty Beniers at the NHL level. Certainly it's been rocky for the Seattle Kraken since he's been around. But I think that this tournament really showed that he is somebody capable of playing at an extremely high level with good players around him and against good competition, and what it is that he thrives at, RJ, because that's the big takeaway for me from this, is that Matty Beniers was the 2C on this Team USA team. He's centering the second line, had line mates going into the gold medal game. His line was Matty Beniers centering Tage Thompson and Frank Nazar. Like that is a great line. He's playing with some really good players there. And what Matty Beniers went out there and did this tournament, RJ, was, yeah, he didn't necessarily light up the score sheet, 6 points in 10 games, but he was playing on both special teams units. He was driving possession for Team USA. He was shutting things down in the defensive zone. Like, he was a huge factor for this Team USA squad being able to go out there and win gold, and for his line mates to be able to go out there and create positive momentum for the team to get on the score sheet themselves, all of that kind of stuff. And it just really kind of, I think, works as a good highlight of what it is that Matty Beniers actually brings to whatever team he's on.
Yeah, I'm with you completely on this. And you look at that 2C role that he's in and the line mates that he has. I think we saw a little bit of this with the Kraken when they bring in a Capo Caco and you have some size that you can work with. And it unlocked a part of Matty Beniers' game that I think we hadn't previously seen, at least not back to his rookie season. And so with those line mates in that role, I think you're looking at kind of the ideal spot to put him in. I think if you're the Kraken long term, you're probably hoping he can be a good 200-foot 2C just like that, who plays on both special teams units and helps you out there. And the Kraken don't really have the players to be able to put him in that spot right now. The hope is long term that you can build that around him. But it does show some of the potential that he has if he's put in the right spot. And it really got me thinking too. I mentioned back to the live game commentary we had yesterday, talk about the Florida Panthers and guys like, Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett, who were high draft picks, who couldn't figure it out in their first destinations, but they also kind of had to be the guy more than you would ideally want on a team. Whereas in that Panther system and culture, they'll be able to put like a Sam Bennett, in a second line type of role where he doesn't have to be the one driving everything, taking the toughest matchups necessarily, but he can absolutely thrive into that kind of situation, be a very valuable player to a team. I think in the future, we'll see that sort of thing for a Matty Beniers once the Kraken build out the roster a little bit more and acquire some of that top end talent.
Yeah, I mean, I like kind of wanted to do a whole thing on what the Kraken could kind of learn from this Florida Panthers squad, as they're now going
There's a lot.
to 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, and why there should be hope for Kraken fans. That, obviously 3 straight Stanley Cup finals is something that everybody would hope for, and is maybe a little unachievable, but just as far as a squad like that was a team that was really struggling to make playoffs. This was not like a in and out of it kind of team. They were solidly out of it. They had to build through the draft. They had to make some tough moves regarding their own players. But they went out there, and the big thing was that they picked a direction. They thought of what identity they wanted to have, and they went out there and then they assembled a team that could do it. And they created structure that they believed in and that they believed could go out there and work. They got a bunch of players like Sam Bennett, Sam Reinhart, whose careers were on life support. You bring them in. Gustav Forsling off of waivers, right? Brandon Montour, who at the time was, seen as a little bit of a disappointment when he goes to Florida, right? Just as far as expectations that were placed on him when he was traded to Buffalo and what he was able to actually then accomplish in Buffalo. Again, probably not his fault. We see everybody struggle in Buffalo when it comes to that. But they were able to amass this collection of players like that and very quickly turn things around just by having the right general manager, the right head coach, and the right direction. And once they had that structure and that team identity established by the front office and the coaching staff, they were able to go out there and work with those players and turn players like, a Sam Bennett, a Sam Reinhart, or Carter Verhaeghe, who was somebody who was kind of out of it in his mid-20s when he goes to Florida, into guys that are now, like I said, going to 3 Stanley Cup finals in a row, but obviously looking like big-time players. And I think that there's something that, Kraken fans can take from that, which is, even though right now the core for the Kraken seems like it's struggling, things seem a little aimless at times. We're still waiting on a head coach and all of that. If the organization is able to, kind of settle on a direction, pick a direction, create that structure, this is possible. You have a lot of pieces, just like the Panthers had pieces. You can go out there and you can find those additions to add, to build around a Matty Beniers, a Shane Wright, and you can then go out there and turn your team into a legitimate contender. Sasha Barkov, great player. No success for 7 years of his career, basically, from a team standpoint, because there wasn't enough of a team around him. And I think that could be the case here with this Kraken group. Obviously, a lot of stuff has to go right for you to end up the Florida Panthers. It's not as easy as I maybe just made it sound, but I think that the Panthers do offer a little bit of, hope for people that are maybe, concerned about the Kraken here and what certainly their core could become and the direction of the team and everything.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And also just so many of their players that they have that they acquired via trade or that they didn't draft as well. So it shows if you can wheel and deal, there's a lot you can get done. And now the Kraken have a GM who's probably more willing to do that sort of thing.
Yep, exactly. Finishing up with Team USA, just because we went on that tangent there. Again, we could have probably made that this whole podcast, really going in depth on all of that stuff. Finishing out with Team USA for Worlds, though, RJ, Mikey Eyssimont looking like Mikey Eyssimont over there, being that, fourth line speedy winger, able to go out there and do what he does. I thought that he looked good. Would love to see the Kraken bring him back as always. And then Joey Daccord, RJ, who was kind of battling with Jeremy Swayman for that top dog spot on Team USA, ultimately lose out to Jeremy Swayman because Joey Daccord has to be the goalie that walks away with the one loss Team USA has in the tournament.
The standard is very high for winning the starting goalie job there in a short tournament like that. And Jeremy Swayman, I mean, hats off to him. He had a really great tournament. But I did enjoy seeing the friendship blooming there between Joey Daccord and Jeremy Swayman, two guys who I'm sure would get along just based on their great personalities. So that was fun to watch, even though Joey didn't get the net for the end of the tournament.
Yeah. No, I thought that it was a lot of fun to watch. Not totally surprising, just given that, they both just seem both seem like incredibly likable guys. We obviously know that Joey is super friendly. Just it was not surprised at all to see them become buddies over there. Looking elsewhere at Worlds, Ellie Tolvanen was the highest scoring. Ellie Tolvanen, Brandon Montour tie for highest scoring players that are related to the Kraken at the tournament. Ellie Tolvanen, part of Team Finland, 7 goals in 8 games. RJ, I mean, he just, again, I think is another example of if Tolvanen is able to play in a structure that really can feature him or with line mates that can really, work with him or maybe at a higher skill level, he's got that, first round pedigree and all of that stuff. It's still in there, right? Like he can still go out there and just be a big time player.
Right. And I mean, I think you see sometimes players build on a successful season in the NHL. They go to Worlds and they keep that success rolling and keep the momentum going. And I think that's what we saw from Eeli Tolvanen in this tournament. It felt like things were really going his way, especially to finish the season in Seattle. And then he's able to just parlay it into this tournament. I think the most noteworthy highlight for him, the 4-goal game against Slovenia was pretty cool, as he gets 4 of his goals in that one. And I mean, I think it was a 9-1 win. So I do tend to discount those games just a little bit because of the skill imbalance with the teams, but still impressive production and performance from Tolvanen in that tournament.
Yeah. So, congrats to him on his performance there. Brandon Montour, also better than a point per game player at this tournament, RJ, tied for the lead in points amongst defensemen for the tournament. Beats out his competition there if you look at things from a point per game standpoint. They're working with Team Canada, and Team Canada, maybe not as much as when with their World Junior squads, but boy, they want to have one dedicated puck moving defenseman who's going to go out there for like half the game and then just be the facilitator for the squad. And Brandon Montour was able to fulfill that role beautifully.
Yeah, and I think he made a good case for. I think he's still probably on the outside looking in for the Olympics next year, but this is one of those tournaments where I think a lot of guys wanted to go in and try and make a good impression on the decision makers for next year's Olympic tournament. And I mean, we did talk about Montour for the Four Nations tournament as someone who was maybe possible that you could pick, and so I think he did a good job making a case.
Yeah, I would think that this performance gets him on the short list for like reserve players.
I think that's kind of where he's at too. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of in that spot there. Adam Larsson, obviously had a good tournament for Team Sweden. Didn't have the success that I know that they were probably hoping for, but he was a big part of that blue line for them. And then really the last player that I want to talk about and really, focus on here, RJ, is Oscar Fisker Molgaard with Denmark. Going out there and 7 points.
Big surprise of this tournament,
games.
By the way,
I
Denmark.
know. Huge performers there in this tournament. And Oscar Fisker Molgaard was a big part of that.
Yeah, he was. I mean, 7 points in 10 games. I mean, like it's a real solid complement of ice time as Denmark gets all the way to the semifinal for the first time, I believe, in their history. I don't think they've gotten to the semifinal before. Beating Canada, by the way. We just talked about Montour and that Canadian team. Beating them in the quarterfinal, with Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon. And I mean, just a pretty stacked Canadian team. Impressive tournament all around by Denmark. But I mean, I'll let you talk most about Fisker Molgaard just because I know you've liked him from even before the Kraken drafted him. But like, did you get the chance to watch him at all in the tournament? Like, what'd you see?
I didn't get a chance to watch too much of it. Like Worlds with the NHL playoffs going on and everything, and the season always ending, Worlds kind of has to take a backseat priority for me. But when watching him, I mean, it's the same thing that we saw in Coachella Valley, what we've been seeing in Sweden from him, both after the Kraken drafted him and before, which is similar to Matty Beniers in the sense that this is a guy that you could put out there and he's maybe not going to produce a ton of points, even if you're giving him, the big minutes, but you can trust him in any situation to go out there and do the right thing. He's a player, unlike Matty, that does like to kind of go to the net front a little bit more. He can play on the inside, in the offensive zone a little bit more. Great forechecker, can go out there, really puts pressure on defenses, helps limit what other teams can do as far as breakouts. Like he's just so good at taking away what the other team wants to do as far as breaking out of their own zone. It's really incredible to watch him there. Can handle special teams duties. He's just so effective. And then that's all without even talking about his remarkable defense, which was the first thing I fell in love with in his game, going way back to when he was draft eligible several years ago now. I'm really happy for him to have had this opportunity with Denmark. I know he's played at Worlds before, but this time it felt like he was further up in the lineup, given more responsibility. Obviously, the team was able to have more success than they've had before, and I feel like him coming into his own as a player now that he's 20, 21, 20. It's just really kind of showcasing how he's coming along and what he can potentially bring to an NHL roster, where I've been saying forever he could be that key bottom six center for a squad that's going to be able to go out there and really help keep pressure going while your top guys are sitting on the bench.
And the one stat I want to point out too, as I look this up here, from that Canada-Denmark game where Denmark gets the upset over Canada, it's a 2-1 game. I mean, the name of the game here, it was scoreless through 2 periods, is just try and hold Canada off the board so that you can
Try to
strike at some
control the
point.
game.
Exactly, control the game. And Molgaard with 18:42 of
Yeah.
ice time, which is second among the Danish forwards in that game, behind only Nikolai Ehlers, true star player there.
Yeah.
And I mean, that just shows how highly they think of him to put him in all those situations. You know, he doesn't get on the score sheet, he doesn't have a point in that game, but the defensive work in that 18:42 was huge in giving Denmark that upset.
Yeah, no, he's so good at that kind of stuff. Like if you want to build, and I guess we could talk about this later when we maybe talk about Lane Lambert. But if you want to build like a team that is going to go out there and try to grind out wins, play a highly structured game, a highly defensive game, I mean he is somebody that you want on your team completely. I'm really intrigued after this performance at World Juniors or at the World Championships, RJ. I mean, also his performance at the World Junior like kind of qualifier or lower level tournament. But you know, the Olympic qualifiers, what he did at the Swedish league this year and at the AHL level, I'm really intrigued to see where he's at come training camp and where they're gonna probably, obviously he's probably going to be going to the Firebirds, but where they ultimately decide to play him with Coachella Valley. Because I think that he has the potential at the AHL level to be like a top 6 guy if you want to play that structured role and give him like 18 minutes a night. Or are they going to really just try to groom him for that bottom 6, like checking line center kind of role that he'll most likely be at the NHL level? But he's one of the players that I'm most looking forward to seeing him through training camp and what he can kind of do, because I think that it creates an interesting question for the Kraken when it comes to their center depth. Like I know we talk about the Chandler Stevenson signing kind of getting in the way of like Shane Wright, Matty Beniers, all of that kind of stuff. I think of players like Oscar Fisker Molgaard of like where like he's getting close to being ready for the NHL already, certainly in a bottom 6 capacity, but where's he supposed to go?
Right. In a couple of years, you might think he'd be a really good, cheap 3C that you can just, roll out there and have play that defensive game. But where does he go? Especially if Berkeley Catton projects as a center long term. There's a lot of questions to maybe ask with that, but they're probably for a little bit further down the line. But I would be interested too to talk to Jeff Tambellini about Molgaard this at Dev Camp next month.
Yeah, no, that should be really exciting. Maybe talk to Molgaard himself about all of this.
That's true.
And how he feels like his game has grown. And I'm so thankful he's out of Sweden, RJ, because boy, the teams that he has been forced to be a part of there have been rough.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I don't want to, speak too negatively about HV71 and I'm sure I'll butcher this. What is it? You studied Swedish for a little bit, like Jönköping? I don't know the vowel sounds.
Yeah,
I can never get right.
It would be.
I just know the K makes the SH sound.
Yes,
that's all I know.
Yeah, in certain situations.
Any Swedes listening, let me know how to properly pronounce that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he's going to be an interesting one, but I was really happy that this tournament was able to be like a kind of a nice breakout opportunity for people on the national stage to kind of see and appreciate him. I was very happy about that. All right, moving on to the season ticket holder Q&A with new Kraken general manager Jason Botterill. And first thing I want to say about this, RJ, I'm so happy that they did this and that like there was communication from the front office about things. Like that's so dope.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's something that we can never really, take for granted. It's very important to, have the front office communicate with the fans. And I like too that they posted on YouTube so soon afterward as well. So that, of course you want to give the season ticket holders the ability to watch it live and treat them well and have the questions there from them. I understand that. But if you're not a season ticket holder, you could also just watch it, in a couple days on YouTube, and everybody can kind of see it and get on the same page about what the front office is thinking.
Yeah, and they ran the gauntlet of all of the questions that we get all the time, RJ, that we know Kraken fans really want asked and answered. And I thought that they did a good job talking about what he could talk about. Obviously, some questions are not going to be something that he can answer directly. I think everybody kind of understands that, but I felt like he did a good job, even when it was a question that he couldn't, just give a straight answer to. I felt like he did a good job talking about, things related to it or explaining the process, if possible, things like that. And I was really appreciative about that. Some of the things that I wanted to kind of focus on here from that was asked kind of who he views as the young core of the team, RJ, and who the team views as their young core to build around. And the answer was Maddie, Shane, and Riker Evans, which, he is the young core piece of the blue line, but I was still maybe a little surprised by that.
Well, I mean, given the end of the season for Riker Evans, where he did finish the season on a downward trajectory, I think there were some questions about, okay, where does the organization view him long term? I mean, are they a little concerned? And also, he's going to need a new contract this offseason, and they're going to have a decision to make. Do you try and lock him up long term? And I believe the projection on that deal it would be 5-year deal at 6 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it 6 year? Yeah, no, 6-year deal at 5 million.
6-year deal at 5 million.
6-year deal at 5 million. Or do you go shorter term, something like projected, 2 years times 2.8, I think is the projection on that one. And so that's a big choice to make. And you have to decide, is he going to be really a long-term part of your core, or do you want to wait and see kind of more what he is? And that would seem to indicate that the organization, is still confident in him, that they're not concerned about the way that the season ended, that they think he can kind of shake that off and get back to the Riker Evans that we saw from early the year, and just from the way he's developed since the Kraken drafted him. I'm not saying they're going one way or the other with a contract, but it was an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. Sorry, I have to send a quick text there. Yeah, it was an interesting one there for me. It just kind of stood out a little bit. I thought when it came to talking about processes and describing those, one of the ones that I thought was really interesting was when talking about analytics and how the team kind of focuses on that. And he said that their main focus when it comes to the analytics department kind of, and then what they communicate to him as the general manager in the general manager role, is they focus on building a single number that then encompasses all of the analytics work rather than just focusing on certain specific metrics. And I thought that was really interesting, because obviously that's something in the analytics community that people have been kind of trying to do for a long time. But I thought that was an interesting thing. I know you've got stuff to say on that.
Yeah, I thought that was actually the most interesting thing that was said in the entire Q&A. That's the one that really made my ears perk up, because it's rare that we get a window into the inner workings of these analytics departments and how they work and the way that they're able to present this information to the decision makers. Because we know the people that work in these analytics departments, they pour over so much data and so many numbers, and they build so many models, and they tweak them, and they do all this stuff. And a big part of that job is finding a way to simplify that information into useful takeaways. Because again, if you tried to give a GM all the information that you are intaking, right, and are bombarded with, there's no way they can really make sense of it in a way that can lead to like meaningful action. That is your job, to package that in a way that can be presented to somebody that they can make an important decision based off of it. And there are different ways to do that. I mean, you can talk, we talk about, like offensive metrics, defensive metrics, kind of trying to break things down into different parts of the game. But I thought it was very interesting that he talked about basically trying to distill it all into one number. And we do see that sometimes with like war stats, wins above replacement. And so people do try and do that. There are some public war models that we do get to see and know about, but I'm sure given team numbers and everything, they've got totally different level of data than what we have publicly available. And I was just, I don't want to say surprised, but I was just interested, I guess, that they really distill it down to one number, because it's not something you have to do. You can throw 3 or 4 numbers at somebody, but the idea that they find it more useful to just kind of give them one number that encapsulates everything, and that they feel confident enough that in that one number, you can tell enough of the story to take proper action based on.
Right. And so I think it's fascinating too. I do wonder how much the general managers focus on that, like how much Botterill or Ron Francis before really focuses on that number. I think that that's something that's really interesting that we'll probably never know. And also, it then brings up the question for me of, does that number get communicated to the coach as well? Right? Like,
Yeah.
is this something that is just used in roster construction, or is this also something that's used by the coaching staff that maybe helps determine lineups and where guys fit in there? I thought it's one of those things that I'm happy to have that kind of insight. I think it's really great that he talked about that. Like, again, the communication and the opening up of some of these processes was really fantastic to hear, but it does just lead to more questions.
I know I have way more questions after hearing that than I would have had beforehand. And so you can't ever get too deep into it. Like, I don't expect most of the questions I have to ever be answered or to ever know.
Yeah.
But yeah, because you don't want to give away your secrets. I understand that. But
Right.
man, it just leaves me wanting more.
And, is this something that they just do for members of their own organization, or is this done for potential free agents, trade targets? I would assume that to some extent anyway,
Oh,
it
yeah.
would be. Yeah. How is this done for Coachella Valley? That's another question I had. And how much do they think that translates from the AHL level to the NHL level? Or I mean, I'm sure they have data that tells us how much it translates. Like, that is something I'd be fascinated to know. There's some really interesting stuff there. Do they look at that number when they go into contract negotiations, which I also thought was interesting, because we learned that Ricky Olczyk, the assistant general manager, is the one that handles those for the team, which was information at least you and I were not aware of.
Right. That was new to me as well. And just knowing who handles the contract negotiations, I thought that was very interesting. But like, you look at it from this offseason perspective, just a quick example or something. But like, you have Mikey Asemont, who we talked about earlier, and it might
Right.
be nice if the Kraken brought him back. But then, okay, do you have kind of a number for him and what he brings? And then you compare it to other maybe fourth line forwards on the free agent market. And then you look and you ask Ricky Olczyk also, okay, what might that guy cost? What's the value structure there? And you could make kind of a pretty easy one-to-one comparison if it's distilled that much.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a really fascinating thing to kind of hear and have talked about. And again, appreciate him for even mentioning as much as it was, but again, led to a lot of questions. The other stuff that I thought was important, or that piqued my interest, was kind of walked back a little bit the idea of Berkeley Catton being guaranteed that like 9-game stint that Ron Francis had talked about after the trade deadline, but basically said that they want to make sure that if Berkeley Catton is playing at the NHL level, that he isn't just surviving, but that he's out there and he's playing meaningful minutes in a meaningful role, and he's actually playing well before they want to kind of commit an NHL roster spot, a spot in the lineup for him. And hey, makes sense, and that's what you should be doing with a young guy like him.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And actually, I kind of was a little head scratching the initial messaging on maybe guaranteeing him that roster spot right off the bat. When was it Francis talking about that when he went
Yeah, it
on?
was Francis right after the trade deadline, before that Flyers game. Remember, it was pregame on Kraken Hockey Network before the game in Philadelphia, and he said he would get a 9-game stint. Or it felt like he was maybe like he just like missaid how that was going to go, but that's what he said.
Right. And so that was really what made me think. And so this is more the attitude I would expect to treat a player, where you have to earn it in training camp, and we'll see where it goes from there. And then, of course, mentioning that you want him playing important minutes. You don't want him just sitting there as a fourth liner for 9 games or potentially even more. You want him doing things that can help his development. I mean, we've had this conversation so many times with Shane Wright already. I think everyone knows kind of how we feel about it, but you want to make sure that Berkeley Catton's in a position to succeed.
Right. I mean, we talked about this, but when Shane was drafted, like, I remember
That's what I'm
on
saying,
that
2 years
draft
ago we
night
talked about it,
stream
yeah.
talking about how you want to end up doing that with Shane Wright. Obviously, the organization kind of didn't, and I think that's it's been talked about plenty by us that they haven't, but it seems like maybe they've kind of learned from that situation a little bit here with Berkeley Catton. So it'd be interesting to see come training camp how he's looking against the NHL guys, because obviously I expect him to be at Dev Camp and him to show up in big way at Dev Camp, but I'm really intrigued to see how he shows up at training camp and kind of where his level seems like he's at, and if he's able to kind of push and obviously preseason games, all that kind of stuff. So we shall see there. talked about how when the inconsistency, the struggle in the back-to-back games, the inconsistency with the team this year, and he mentioned travel and being a West Coast team, RJ. And this is something that we haven't really heard the Kraken, I feel like, talk about before. We've heard other West Coast teams talk about it in the past, but just the additional travel and the wear and tear that it just adds to the experience when you're out here on the West Coast. And you're playing an 82 game season, and those plane rides are just a couple hours extra, stacked on top of things. And it isn't necessarily just a quick little bus ride to get from your city to the next city, right? If you're playing like in the tri-state area, something like that. I did think that it was interesting just because we have not heard the Kraken, to my knowledge, mention that as a reason for inconsistency or struggles and things like back to back before.
Yeah, at least not publicly. I mean, I do remember, I don't know whether this was from Media Scrum or it's just stuff I heard kind of secondhand, but I think it was both Hackstall and Bilesma at various points, not necessarily tying it to inconsistency, but talking about just how the practice schedule has to be different for a team on the West Coast versus a team on the East Coast, where you just don't have as much time to practice with the travel schedule. And if you tried to practice like an Eastern Conference team, you would just get run into the ground. You just can't possibly do it. And so you do have to be a little bit more selective in your practice schedule and stuff like that. And I'm sure that can lead to a level of inconsistency sometimes. I still don't think, in general, and I think Botterill would say this too, it's not a good excuse necessarily. Teams find a way to figure it out. I mean, growing up, remember Death Valley, California, where it was the Kings, Ducks, and Sharks, all excellent teams, all a nightmare to play against, all very consistent. And they were all out on the West Coast having to deal with that travel. So it's definitely something you can work through. But, if you do feel it is causing problems, that's something to look at and see, can we fix this or edit this in any way that's going to make it easier,
right?
Like with a practice schedule.
Yeah. How can we adjust our schedule? How can we adjust how we do things to make it so that this isn't as impactful as it maybe otherwise is? And then finally, talking about the coaching search, RJ, we can use this to transition into talking about all the coaching rumors and everything. Mentioned that because they were an expansion franchise and that history is still very fresh with the team, that they have a lot of people from a lot of different orgs, and that has led to a lot of networking and their ability to, get opinions internally about a lot of different coaching candidates. And again, I just thought that was something that was interesting. It's something that many people might not just think of, but having that internal knowledge base, because you're an expansion franchise, having all of those people from different organizations, so that if you're like, hey, who's had experience, who was it, where, and did they know this guy, and what's your opinion on him? Should we reach out to him for an interview, something like that? I thought that was really interesting. And then the big one was, of course, that they have not offered the job to anyone. Again, this is a week old now, but that they had not offered the job to anyone, kind of dispelling that rumor about them having offered the job to Rick Tocchet, who, of course, chose to go to Philadelphia.
Right. And that was something that I think the organization is probably making an effort to try and get ahead of, because I would understand from their perspective why, whether they offer the job to him or not, why you wouldn't want people believing that he turned it down. So that was an interesting comment there. And so with that, we can kind of get into the rumor roundup and kind of see, okay, what is the status of the coaching search? Because Botterill, while the coaching search is going on, he can't really say a lot aside from just that, well, we haven't offered the job to anybody yet, we're still looking. And has to kind of keep a lot of the particulars and who they're talking to and everything under wraps. He can't really talk about it, but reporters can talk about it and try and get the scoops and figure out who the Kraken have talked to. And from a collection of national reports, it seems like we're kind of narrowed down to 4 names from everything that we've heard. And that is Mitch Love, Lane Lambert, Marco Sturm, and David Quinn. Those seems like the kind of final 4 names that the Kraken are connected to. Just starting just with the state of the reporting and what we've seen. Mitch Love. So it sounds like the Kraken have some interest there, like they have talked to him. He's been linked to the team. There is a report from Anthony DeMarco that it was close, but then the deal fell through. But again, not confirmed anywhere else or anything. It's just that standalone report. We'll see. It does sound from other reports like Mitch Love is really talking to Pittsburgh and that his most likely destination is Pittsburgh. So that's the status on him at this point. Then there's Lane Lambert. Report from Elliot Friedman that he did interview with the Kraken and that it went well. So Lambert seems like maybe the most closely linked person to the Kraken right now, where it seems like the likelihood might be on the upswing based on what the reporting has said. Then there's Marco Sturm, who has been linked to the Kraken. We have talked about him, on a previous episode. There are reports that he basically would be the next coach in Boston. That was a few days ago, almost confirming that he would be the coach in Boston, but nothing's been officially confirmed since then. So maybe worth pumping the brakes on that, but he has still been linked to the Kraken. So figured his name is still worth mentioning. And then David Quinn, who has been linked to the Kraken from pretty early on in the coaching search. I don't believe he's been linked to any other teams, which makes sense to me, but it sounds like he is one of the finalists for the Kraken job. So those are the four names that we have. And I know people have also been asking the question of, okay, when are they going to name the coach? That was kind of part of it too. And of course, Botterill can't speak to that.
Yeah.
But I think it's an important question of, okay, why has it taken this long and what are they waiting for? And to me, it just kind of makes logical sense that we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that maybe the Kraken have one of the lesser desirable jobs out of all the coaching openings. And so when that is the case, you usually have to wait for other teams to make their decision, especially if you're looking at some of the same people.
Right. And that's I think the big thing here is that, because of the Kraken's position in all of this, they're in one of those spots where you have to wait for the other dominoes to fall and then kind of, see who's left, basically. And it sounds like that's where they're still at, right? We'll see if Sturm goes to Boston. We'll see if Love goes to Pittsburgh. But it very much feels like that is what's going on here. And so maybe the Kraken end up being officially the last team to name their head coach, or maybe they're able to name somebody a little bit before one of those other jobs is the last one to get filled. But, just because those teams are going in a direction in negotiations, or maybe just taking a sec. But if you're the Kraken, that coach is going there. But it really does feel like that's kind of where we're at right now with the Kraken. Is they're either talking to people that have not really been connected to other teams, or they're waiting, and some of the names that we've heard them connected to are still out there, but also heavily rumored to be in for those other jobs. If that's the case, then this makes sense that it's just taken a while, and you just kind of have to wait on other teams to do their business first.
Yeah, and then when Boston makes a decision, when Pittsburgh makes a decision, then I think the door is open. Certainly if the time arrives where the Kraken are the last coaching job available, I would expect then a decision pretty imminently, because I would imagine they've done their homework by now.
I would assume, and you would want to get things underway, because not only do you have to, hire and onboard that coach and everything there, and get them up to speed on the organization's larger plans on how they're attacking the offseason, and maybe any input they would have for something like free agency, whatever. But you have dev camp stuff coming up, which I know the NHL coach isn't necessarily totally involved with, but you have a coaching staff to build out. Like, that can take time to interview and go through and find the candidates you want to fill out your coaching staff, and get them in place and get them up to speed on the game plan, and brainstorm what you want your game plan to be for the upcoming season. Look at the roster and what pieces you have, and come together on what you want to do with them before training camp hits in September. So yeah, it is one of those things where I wouldn't expect it to go too deep into June before we get some sort of announcement, because you need time.
You do. And it's not like last year where you're bringing in a Dan Bilesma who already is familiar with the organization. A lot of the players can kind of hit the ground running in that sense. You're going to need more time for a coach to get acclimated. So I would expect it soon. It's not, crazy different than the timeline of last year. I believe it was May 27th last year that we found out that Bilesma would be the coach. He was officially introduced on the 28th, and it is the 29th today. So it's not all that different, but you'd expect something at least in the next week. I don't want to tempt fate again on them waiting longer, but just
I was gonna say, let's check the feeds right now, just confirm, right?
Yeah, confirm that the coach has not been named. That would be too convenient for us. Yep, no, I've checked. Jonathan Taves apparently wants to make a comeback this year. That's the news that just broke, but not not anything on the Kraken coaching search. So
Yeah.
let's look at the state of the search here with Love, Lambert, Sturm, and Quinn. Just real quick, because I'm sure everybody wants to. We've already talked about 3 of the 4 names, but I mean, Mitch Love is still the only one here who excites me. Is that the case for you?
Yeah. He's the one that it feels like the biggest get if you're able to get him. Somebody who is just on a rocket ship style trajectory from what he was able to do at the junior level and then at the AHL level where he had a ton of success, and then moving on to working with the Washington Capitals as an assistant coach these last couple of seasons. He is definitely the one that I think everybody would be the most excited about, probably.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the case. I mean, I already mentioned last week, I have kind of 3 tiers: my like excited tier, meh, okay, acceptable tier, and then the please don't do it tier. And I think Love is in the excited tier, Lambert and Sturm in the okay tier, and then Quinn in the don't do it tier. So that's kind of where I'm at this point. But one name we haven't talked about yet, because this came out after the last podcast, and he really wasn't linked to the Kraken at all before this, is Lane Lambert. And there is even more smoke there than some of the other candidates, because the Kraken had to ask the Toronto Maple Leafs permission to talk to him and to interview him. So we know that they have reached out about him. We know he's connected to the Kraken. And so Lane Lambert is a name that we really didn't identify in the first couple episodes that we did. He's an assistant coach with the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. He does have previous experience as the head coach of the New York Islanders from 2022 to 2024. It was kind of a season and a half that he coached the Islanders. And then before that, he was an associate coach with the Islanders, an assistant coach of the Washington Capitals and Nashville Predators. Basically followed Barry Trotz from 2011 on, coached under him. And then when Barry Trotz left the Islanders, Lambert took over the head coaching job for a year and a half. So Dylan, what do we think about Lane Lambert?
Yeah, I mean, Lane Lambert's a really interesting guy to be in this conversation because, limited head coaching experience, but very recent. Him getting let go by the Islanders last season or 2 seasons ago now.
Oh yeah, that was last season.
It was like a really, really kind of frequent. So there's that element of it, but intriguing in the sense that somebody that is, going to be focused on defense, be focused on building up special teams, if possible, had a good record with the Islanders. Like, that's the part about this that is really intriguing. Is his first year with the Islanders, they're a 93-point team. They go to the postseason. They lose in the first round, but they make the playoffs. And then year 2, when he's let go, he's above 500 when they
NHL 500.
NHL 500, yes. The 19, 15, and 11, the record there for the Islanders when they let him go. And
I mean, real quick, Dylan, you did complain about the Kraken not having enough OTLs this past season. That's a lot of OTLs.
127 games he coached with the Islanders. 20 of them went to overtime. It became OTL. So, just saying that is something to look at. But we don't see that super often. That somebody who has a points percentage at the time of .544 gets let go mid-season. But I think when you look at what was going on with the Islanders, and you certainly, if you go back and you read what fans had to say about it, they were really struggling in terms of structure and trying to figure out what systems they want to do. Their defensive structure was, if you ask some people, non-existent. I think that it was just maybe more misguided for the personnel they had. They did have some injuries on the blue line that I think factored into it, but they were hemorrhaging shots, and they were very lucky to have a goalie like Ilya Sorokin back there to deal with that. I think that's ultimately why they ended up making that move to Patrick Waugh, who's still the coach there. It was for him to be able to go in there and really fix that defensive structure. And for a guy who is a defensive coach, RJ, that is where maybe some hesitation creeps in for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I mean, with Lambert, he is one of the coaches where at least I can kind of see the vision of what the Kraken might be going for. I certainly have my questions and concerns about it, but excuse me, that is my biggest takeaway with Lambert, is that he is a defensive specialist. He coaches defense in the penalty kill. That's kind of what he worked on with the Maple Leafs. But that's really his MO. And I was reading stuff from Islanders beat writers at that time too, talking about how the Islanders were at their best when they played a very defensive, low event style of hockey. One we might also describe as boring. We certainly did describe that Islanders
Yeah,
team as boring at the time on the Red Glare
we
podcast.
have,
I remember
yes.
that we did. Um, but in doing so, he was able to get an underskilled, I would say,
Yeah.
Islanders team to the playoffs. And so that's the vision that I'm seeing. If the Kraken were to go with Elaine Lambert, I would imagine that's the kind of thing he's probably talking about in that interview that reportedly went well, was about being able to get the most out of the team by playing solid defensive hockey. And remember listening to Ron Francis talk about why they let go of Dan Bilesma. He was not happy with the way the team was playing structure wise and especially
Hmm.
defensively. And we could all see it. Like Francis didn't need to say it. We talked about it post game after post game after post game, how they just could not fix the defensive issues. So bringing in a coach who would try to do that could make sense, I think. And so you look at his record with the Islanders, they were able to play solid enough defense, but they really leaned heavily on their goaltending, special teams wise, because I think that's important. Lambert, I think really a PK specialist. The Islanders had the 9th best PK in the league that year. They had the 3rd worst power play. So there's that as well. I think the power play numbers really struggled there, and you'd want to bring in a proper power play specialist if you did hire Lambert. But to me, this is what the blueprint would be. Become the 2022-2023 New York Islanders, and lean heavily on Joey Decord, fix the defensive issues, become a team that basically tries to win lots of 2-1 games.
Hmm.
Or be in games that are 1-1 going into overtime, and whatever happens,
Yeah.
happens at that point. You collect the points. That is the Lane Lambert blueprint, I think. And it is boring, but it's probably more effective than what the Kraken had this year. I remember Dylan, you talked about like the Calgary Flames
Hmm.
doing a version of that last year,
Yeah.
leaning heavily on Dustin Wolf as their goalie, being just defensively sound enough and just getting their chances in counterattack when they can. And you look at the result, they were much closer to a playoff berth than the Kraken were, with probably a similar amount of skill. And so, as much as I hate to say it, it might be the most realistic path to sneaking into the playoffs right away. If that is your only goal, I could understand seeing why Lambert would make sense.
Yeah, no, I totally see it too. Like the vision is there. What I worry about is the long term, right? Like that
Oh yeah.
works. That works for a year, maybe two. It didn't even work for a second year with the Islanders, right? And that's something that would potentially concern me is if you go with Elaine Lambert and that is your end goal, is you want to be competitive again, you want to try to make the playoffs while you're, figuring out what your core is and getting them all on the right track and letting these young players come up and join the roster. I, I I don't know that those two things like work together because like if and Botterill talked about this, right? Like you want maybe Berkeley Catton to be given an opportunity where he can go out there and perform. Yanni Newman, some of the other young guys who played well in Coachella Valley, they're probably not going to be on your NHL roster if your NHL roster has to be geared towards playing a very structured game that is going to be focused on playing defense well, forechecking hard, knowing what to do when you're able to create turnovers in the offensive zone. These are not situations where it's like, hey, let's bring up the young players that thrive on creativity, right? Like a Berkeley Cat. Like there's not as much of a role for a guy like that, and certainly not a guy to be learning at the NHL level if that's what you're going for. And I think that it would be one of those kind of you are aiming for shorter term success probably rather than longer term development. And there's something to be said for that, just to get the team back on the right track, make this team a destination for free agents, rebuild a winning culture, all of that stuff. Like I do think there are definitely benefits to that. I don't want it to sound like it's only negative and you're only thinking short-sighted. Like you do need, like that stuff does need to happen here in Seattle, for this group for sure. But I do wonder what it would mean kind of long term as the team seems to be trending towards a team that really should be going with a younger approach and probably an approach that isn't, let's just, play a very stifling structured game and see how far that gets us.
I share your concerns there. And like, I think this would be taking a shortcut at the expense of the future, trying to just get into the playoffs next year however you can without having to, of course, like if you're not trading your top prospects and all that kind of thing. This is a way to do it via the coaching decision rather than taking big risks as far as selling out futures to try and be better now. And I still think it's not best for the development of the players. You look at that Islanders team too, and you do have a 25-year-old Matt Barzal, but it's a veteran roster. You don't have a whole lot of young guys, particularly young forwards on that team. And I mean, really, your youngest core player is Noah Dobson. And from what I read from Islanders beat writers, he really struggled in that season too. Like that was not good for him and for his development. He did eventually figure it out and turn it around, but I do have concerns about that. And even then, as far as just how likely it is that that sort of thing could work and actually get you to the playoffs, I don't know. You still would have to add some more scoring punch in the offseason at forward, which they can do, but relying on your goaltender that heavily, because I think that's what it would take. This entire plan revolves around Joey Decord being the goalie that he was, the last season and a half, and also staying healthy. Because you look at that Islanders team, Ilya Sorokin, he played 62 games. That is a lot of games, 62 games of incredible hockey. And that's kind of what it takes out of your goaltending. Also, they had Varlamov playing 23 games of pretty good hockey too, 913 save percentage there for him. Like, you need solid goaltending. If your goaltending breaks down at all, this just goes down the drain. And then you're a boring team that can't score and loses games. So
and guys don't want to be playing it, right? Like
no.
When it comes to these heavily structured teams, guys buy in as long as they're winning. The moment the winning stops, nobody's bought in anymore. And that's, I think, what, realistically ended up happening with the Islanders, and probably why they had to make that coaching switch mid-season, despite the fact that, again, they were over NHL 500.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, but this Kraken core is not one that has shown that they, can stick with a system and keep that motivation through good and bad. Like, there are questions about that with this core anyway. So it is risky from that perspective as well.
Right. But yeah, Matt Barzal, solid season, near point per game season that year, but also one of his lower scoring seasons. if we're being real about things, I look at things like with the goaltenders, both goaltenders played insane. Like, we're talking about, 700 quality start percentage for Ilya Sorokin, 636 for Varlamov, and they win a combined 42, 31, and 9, right? Like, you got incredible goaltending, save percentages of 924 and 913 respectively, goals against average of 234 and 2.27 for Varlamov. You were fifth best in goals against in the league. You had a 5-on-5 team save percentage of 931. Okay. And again,
and I'm looking at the more advanced numbers too.
Yeah.
Ilya Sorokin led the entire NHL in goals saved above expected.
I totally believe that. Yeah, no, that he would have
and
to.
Varlamov was at 24th despite only playing 23 games.
Right. He had 14 quality starts in 22 games, like 22 starts. Like, that's crazy. You did have more high danger chances than you gave up. You did have more expected goals for than you gave up if you're this team, but they were by slim margins. And again, like I said, everything was going your way. You had an above league average 5-on-5 shooting percentage at 8.2%. 5-on-5 league average that year was 8%, and you finished 42, 31, and 9. Right, like you still
snuck into the playoffs.
You were a wild card team. And
it didn't really have much of a chance of winning once you got there.
Right. And so it's one of those, like, is the Kraken roster more skilled than this Islanders team? You could make the argument that it is. Like, I do think that it is. But this Islanders team was also perfectly built to play the system that they needed to play, and that system got them a wild card berth. Like, and so much had to go right for that.
Yeah. So that's basically the risk that you're taking. And I don't know, too risky in my book. I just think I don't know. Everything has to work out right for it to work. That said, I really think with just where this roster is at right now and the level of talent on this team, I can't think of a better 1-year bet as far as a way to play that could get you to the playoffs right away.
Right. No, I'm with you. and
Because I
it's
think
true.
look, the bigger issue is we've talked about this, like with Dan and the coaching thing and all this. Like, it's a problem of composition, not coaching.
Mhm.
Like, that is ultimately what the team's problem is. And you could make a good argument. We'll see what kind of magic Botterill can work in the offseason. Like, well, I want to give him a chance, but just looking at it, it looks like probably more than a 1-year fix to fix the composition issue.
Yeah, I'm looking at 5-on-5 stuff from Toronto because obviously he's been in Toronto now last season, so we can also look at what Lane Lambert did in Toronto, and Toronto's second in the league in 5-on-5 save percentage at 931. So like helps put goalies in a position to make saves. Like that is something we can say about the defensive structure here. What is concerning for me is that the Toronto Maple Leafs, RJ, who were a good team in the regular season, they won a lot of hockey games in the regular season, have a lot of skill on their team. 25th in the league, 5-on-5 in high danger percentage. As they allowed significantly more high danger chances against than they were able to get for themselves. And this is a team that has Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, John Tavares, Willie Nylander. They know how to create some good chances. This team hemorrhaged high danger chances. The company that they're in down here, RJ, like they're sandwiched between the Boston Bruins and the Detroit Red Wings, and they're 2 spots above the Kraken. Like they're down there with Buffalo, Anaheim, San Jose, Montreal, Chicago. I know it wasn't a great blue line in Toronto, but like this is not good. That's not good.
No, it's not good company. No, and like, yeah, the blue line wasn't ideal that he had to work with, but you still have some players there. You're not talking about San Jose or Chicago, where realistically, like probably 2 of your 6 guys are not NHL caliber.
Right. So that's another thing that does concern me is, looking at like the Kraken blue line with, Vince Dunn probably handles it. Is Riker Evans going to be able to handle this kind of system and structure? Is he a good fit for him? Is he a good fit for Brandon Montour, who?
Well, that's the thing, is this blue line was
offensive,
built to play
fast.
Just 1 year ago. You were building this to play the Dan Bilesma fast style of hockey, get the puck up ice quick, skate hard. It's going to be a complete about face, just 180 for a lot of these guys, and having to learn a totally different way to play. Look, they're skilled players. I think they can adapt and they can do it, but it's going to be hard.
It is. And so that's something that I think is going to be really interesting to kind of keep an eye on if they, do go in this direction, is what potential roster moves we might see from that. Right.
Yeah.
Like, cause I think that's going to be really interesting. I do think there's going to be some guys on this team absolutely built for this. We talked about him earlier, Matty Beniers. Oh man, Matty Beniers is built for a team like this, right? Like Matty Beniers is going to look fantastic. Capo Caco, I think, could look fantastic, although he might be a little frustrated after finally getting into a top 6 role. That then the top 6 role is going to be all about structure and maybe playing defense in 2-way. But I look at those guys, obviously, an Adam Larson,
Jamie Alexiak. He wasn't a fit for Bilesma's system, but he'd be a fit here.
Exactly. So like you do have pieces that are going to be that would benefit from this, and I think would be able to play the system very, very well. But then you have other pieces that just kind of really stand out as like, I don't know what Chandler Stevenson.
Yeah.
What do you do with Chandler Stevenson? Because like, again, the reason you brought him in was for his skating and his speed. Like defense, we know, is not his thing, right? Possession game is not his thing. We very much know this. I don't know what you do with somebody like him. Like, it becomes interesting. What do you do? What does Shane Wright's development turn into?
Well, because the whole thing is you're encouraging him. All of last season was about encouraging him to try and
to be more offensive,
to shoot more, be more
creative.
Right. And then, if you're playing this defensive grinded out style of hockey, because we know he can revert that. That's where his mind naturally wants to go.
Yes.
He will do it, and he'll do a good job of it. Like, I don't doubt that he can do it, but what are you capping in terms of upside in the long term?
Yeah.
That's my concern.
Yeah. So it's an interesting situation. And I think that it would tell us a lot about the front office and ownership and what they prioritize if they were to go in this direction.
Yeah. I think that would certainly tell you a lot. And I mean, we did hear from ownership, right? From Samantha Holloway. I asked her, what is the standard for on-ice success for the organization? And she said to be a consistent playoff team, and the timeline as soon as possible. And so the as soon as possible leaves open, it's kind of vague, leaves open different levels of interpretation, but that would show me that they really mean as soon as possible, as in right now.
Yep. So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. I got to think that, announcement end of this week or first half of next week, right? Like, I just don't see how this goes on much longer.
No comment. I can't tempt fate. You already got on me about
That's true. It's fair enough. Fair enough. But definitely curious to hear everybody's takes on both the coaching search and what's going on there, as well as everything else we talked about, right? Did you watch Worlds? What did you think of all the Kraken players who were there? If you participated in the season ticket holder Q&A, what'd you think of that? Already probably know what you're thinking about the John Hayden re-signing, but if you just want somewhere else to put out the good vibes and to celebrate it, feel free to do so in the comments down below. We want to thank, of course, our wonderful sponsor, the law offices of Rico Tessendor, one more time for sponsoring the pod. Just there's so much great work, Rico, and really appreciate his involvement with us and his involvement with the Kraken too, right? Season ticket holder, member of the UCH community. You could do so much worse than Rico. That's bad. That's like you with John Hayden being like, you can't pay him less if you tried. But no, but Rico really is a great guy. Really appreciate working with him. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Thanks so much. Oh,
and Dylan, free consultation. You couldn't pay him less if you tried.
It's true. That's true. You could not pay him less if you tried with the free consultation. We appreciate everybody listening, and we'll see y'all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.